So we're going to start off by taking this opportunity to thank our sponsors. And number one, we'd like to thank the Foreman family who's sponsoring it for Refuah Shalema, for Paul, for Beis David Benegos. So indeed, he should merit a Refuah Shalema. Paul and Annie Foreman are sponsoring to commemorate the yahrzeit of Annie's father, Berish Fasten, Dov, Ben, Reb Shaul, Zichrono Livracha. So we thank Paul and Annie. We would also like to thank Naomi and Hertz Lipner and David and Arima Green, who are sponsoring to commemorate the yahrzeit of David and Naomi's father, Tuvia, Ben, Naftali, Zichrono Livracha, Neshama, and Aliyah. So we do thank you. I'd like to thank all those who put time and effort and energy into this very nice gathering. It's always important that we gather as a shul. It's important to give an opportunity for everyone to schmooze a little bit. And let me make this very clear, I did not choose the centerpieces. Okay, someone else did. Someone with this unique sense of humor. But with his unique sense of humor comes a tremendous amount of commitment and love to this organization and shul. And Alan is doing a tremendous amount for the shul, so it's an opportunity to express my and our Hakaras HaTova to Alan for all that is being done, and to the whole team. I don't have the list here of all those who put a lot of time and energy. I know Liz put a lot of time. I know Elaine put a lot of time. Debbie put a lot of time. I know a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into this magnificent gathering, into this delicious meal that we were able to eat with a good appetite. So thank you so much. It's an awesome opportunity to welcome Rebbetzin Marcus back to the Shul from Eretz Yisrael. She's on a North America tour, visiting her children. So we welcome you, and it's a pleasure and honor to have you here tonight as we are going to discuss the city of Tzfat. And David, your job is that when 8:30 arrives, you start like waving and making motions. 8:30, that's when you have to, okay, maybe Devorah could take over that role. Okay, so you're going to be looking and waving and making motions. Okay, that's what you'll be doing. Now, the city of Tzfat, we've been there. It was labeled over the past few hundred years as one of the 4 holy cities in the land of Israel. The city of Tzfat brings out great emotion within our people. There's a deep emotional attachment we have to the city, even though historically it really took off as a Jewish center only in the 13th century. After the Saladin conquers the land of Israel from the Crusades in 1187, a year afterwards, Tzfat is conquered and it starts its development. And we find, even though some are going to make note that there are earlier sources from the 7th century, but as a center, as a Jewish center, as we know it, you have to turn to the beginning of the 13th century. And over the next 200 years, it took off. It really did take off. And it became a very significant city spiritually. I myself had an experience in Tzfat that for me was close to a spiritual experience. Next slide, Alan. Thank you. Is it working? Here we go. White willow bark. White willow, that's all you need to know. White willow bark. What does that have to do with anything? Send my mazel tov here at the wedding. Miriam's on her way to a wedding. Send my mazel tov. Oh, you're not? Oh, no, you're sitting here. Okay, you're still here. Okay. An opportunity. Can't make it that wedding. So, white willow bark. What's the experience? So, about 14 years ago, we had a trip from Memphis, Tennessee to Eretz Israel. It was a unique trip. It was after the 2006 Lebanon war. It was a community trip towards the end of the summer, and it was decided by the community that it would be appropriate if the local rabbis decide to join the trip. So we had, only in Memphis this could occur, we had 3 Orthodox rabbis, 1 conservative, 1 Reform, and 1 Chabad rabbi, who made their way to Eretz Israel, and it was a really elevating experience. It was an experience of unity, and we had the opportunity of schmoozing with people that in general we interacted a little bit less as we are busy throughout the year. During that successful trip, we landed up in Tzfat, but as you know, often on these missions, they start you off at like 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning, and you did not sleep throughout the night because you are jet lagged. And it could drain you sometimes with these trips. And I unfortunately got drained to an extent that I developed a fever there. So I developed a fever. We're traveling from northern Israel. We had an hour in Tzfat before some kind of gathering, and I desperately needed some kind of aspirin, some kind of Motrin or Tylenol. And as I'm walking through the alleyways of Tzfat, there were no pharmacies that were open that evening, but I stopped at this natural store, and I asked them if they have some kind of acamol or aspirin. And the woman said to me, no, but this is Tzfat, and we have what we could offer you here. And that would be a white willow bark tea, which, as you know, the origin of aspirin comes from it. So she makes me this hot tea in this gigantic Duralex glass, and it was hot, that was as bitter as anything you could imagine. And I'm sitting there, and you know, some old timers have the ability to drink something very hot very fast. I'm not one of them. Okay, I'm not one of the old timers, and I'm not one of those who could do that. So I'm sitting there sipping slowly, right, this hot, bitter tea, looking out at these alleyways of old Tzfat. And that was my spiritual experience in Tzfat. That's my personal experience. However, there are those that have different types. Move on to the next slide. And it is not possible to talk about Tzfat and not make reference to the Kabbalistic renaissance that's occurring in the second half of the 16th century, where you have the greatest of all mystics, the Arizal, Rabbi Luria, passed away in 1572, but within a very short period of time, inspired a whole generation of Kabbalists and mystics, that within a century it changed the Jewish world. It changed the Jewish world. Jews in Europe were not practicing their Judaism in 1670 the same way it was practiced in 1570, simply because of this great spiritual man. He is not the topic of our discussion, but it is not possible to visit Tzfat without having some kind of relationship with Rabbi Yitzchak Luria the Arizal. This is a common scene of going to the graves of these great rabbis. If you could look carefully, you could identify Moshe Milevsky. This is when I took Moshe the first time to the land of Israel. And this is 2014. So what are we talking about? 5.5 years ago, with a few cousins praying there. Next, Alan. And the right arrow gives you the gravesite of the Ariya Kadosh, buried 1572, next to some great other rabbis. Next. Now, among the experiences that some make part of their journey is a visit to what's known as the mikvah of the Arizal. Meaning, the Arizal spent the last few years of his life in Tzfat. He would go to this ritual bath. There is even a legend, and by some this is more than a legend, that after his passing, the tahara occurred in this mikvah, with some interesting stories that are added. I like pointing out that when I took this picture with the phone at the time, afterwards I noticed a blue glow coming out of the mikvah. So if you are rational, you're going to say, yeah, you had an interesting angle there, and therefore there's a blue glow. If you are not rational and you are a mystic, you see a spirit there, one of the two. But the experience was one that was indeed very elevating. You can see here my younger brother Avidan giving his talk to Moshe. The lights, want to get them down a little bit more?
Yeah, because he can't see.
Can't see. Okay, but you have to believe me, right? Okay, so we'll leave this picture until we see if the lights do a little bit better. It's better? Yeah. Better, okay. This is a test run. I have something. We have a class, we have a lecture planned in a few weeks from now for Hanukkah, correct? And I have a few interesting clips. This is going to be a completely different style, not so much historical, but analyzing contemporary Israel. So this is more of a test to see if this idea of presenting slides works or does not work. The mikvah of the Ari, and you see there to the right my Moshe, a nephew, and my brother Avidan. We could move on to the next slide. Now, here we go. Our story and our discussion begins once we understand that there's a deep emotional attachment to the city, to the graves, to the cemetery that many of you had the opportunity to visit. Our story is going to begin with a rabbi who was known as a Chacham Bashi. What exactly is a Chacham Bashi? So under the Turkish Empire, if you are a chief rabbi of a community, it could be Istanbul, it could be Damascus, it could be Jerusalem, it could be Tzfat, you get the title as a Chacham Bashi. So the Chacham Bashi in Tzfat, who passed away in 1896, his name was Harav Yosef Yehuda Hakim. Rav Hakim has many descendants in the land of Israel. The clip I present here is from some kind of newspaper that made its appearance in 1896, where it notes, Paul, Be'ir HaKodesh Tzfat met, he passed away, Yasef El Amav, the Chacham Bashi, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Hakim. His descendants, who were very aware of the greatness of their father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, continued visiting the grave of their great-grandfather of Rav Hakim for many, many decades afterwards. And on one of their gatherings, a little bit about 15 years ago, they noticed something that brought about tremendous excitement. So a couple meters away from the cave where Rav Hakim is buried, next, they find the following, well, before we get to that, it's going to be very hard to read, but this is a plaque from a house in Tzfat that was used by the Chacham Bashis of Tzfat from the 19th century into the 20th century, and it has the names of all the rabbis, the Chacham Bashis who lived in that house. And right here it's noted Harav Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Hakim, and it mentions the name of his wife, Gracia. Gracia. Okay, who's Gracia. Very common name by Sfaradim, because as you know, Sfaradim originate from Spain. There were many, many Gracias. And Yehuda Hakim's wife, Gracia, they live in this house until the year 1897 when he passed away. So the family of Rav Hakim knew very well about the burial site of Rav Hakim. They knew that their great-great-grandmother was Gracia, but they didn't know more than that until there was funding given by the Israel Antiquities to go ahead and start digging up not graves, but areas with rubble to find more graves in Tzfat. And a lot has been occurring over the past 14, 15 years in Tzfat. And at one point, about 15 years ago, they find the following matzeva on a grave. And the matzeva, which is only a couple feet a couple meters away from Rav Hakim's burial, they find the following matzeva, and it says the following: Hamistofefet b'tzel harav. This person buried here was under the wing and the shadow of the Rav, b'chayea v'gam acharei moto, during her lifetime and also after his passing. Matzah bayit, she found a house. Not very clear what that refers to, but it tells us that hayta menuchata, but eventually she rested here. Harabanit gracia nishmata eden, her soul is in the Garden of Eden. And they find this about 10, 15, perhaps 20 meters away from the actual well-known burial location of Rav Hakim. And for the family members who gathered every single yard site, this was a very exciting event, because they were 100% convinced that they found not their Alta Boba, because it's not Europeans, but they found their Safta Rabba. And within a very short period of time, the family adjusted this matzeva. So if you move on, this is just the words. Hamistofefet b'tzel harav, b'chayea v'gam acharei mota. This is a very unique matzeva in Tzfat. It has no last name. It doesn't have a date, but it does have a name of Gracia. For them, they knew that their great-great-grandmother was Gracia. Mission accomplished. So therefore, what they did was they put up a new matzeva. So what they did is that they removed the stone of Gracia. They put a new stone about 10 years ago or 15 years ago with a clarification of Gracia's matzeva, and built like a complete altar. And the next slide will have it a little bit clearer. So what they wrote is the following. They take the words from the old matzeva, mistofefet b'tzel harav. In parentheses, they added, because they're 100% convinced, they're dealing with Hakim's wife, Yosef Yudah Hakim, zchuto yagen alenu. B'chayea v'gam acharei mota, gracia. So they take an old matzeva that was found, and what do? They clarify it. And it became theirs. There was a problem with it, because there are many historians and experts with matzevos. And you can look at fonts. They have the ability to look at the fonts, how letters were etched. We know very well that you can look at any text, even printed text, and you can look at the fonts used, and you can identify that this was printed in Germany and this one was printed in Poland. How much more so when it comes to etchings, that the experts had a little bit of a problem of relating it to the late 19th century, when they felt that these letters, as we saw earlier, these letters relate more to the earlier graves, like the ones of the late 16th and early 17th century. So this created a little bit of a question, when for the family, they were 100% convinced we found our great-great-grandmother, and were so convinced that without asking anyone, they made an adjustment. They created a new matzeva. On one side of the matzeva, they placed the old one found. On the new one, they put a new matzeva with the clarification. While others have a level of question mark if this is really the gracia of Hakim. There was a question. So before we try to resolve it, let's go briefly through a few great authorities in Tzfat. And we're going to focus on one of them, one very fascinating one. So number one, it is not fair to talk about Tzfat without talking about Rav Moshe Cordovero, considered the great Kabbalist until the Arizal made his way. Someone you could visit. These are modern matzevos that were redone over the past few decades, but he is placed right next to the Ariya Kadosh, indicating his significance. It is not possible. It is not possible to go ahead and visit Tzfat without talking about Rabbi Israel Najara. Rabbi Israel Najara, who wrote Karibon Olam ve'Olmaya. In our family, at home, I continue with the tradition from my grandfather that there is not a Friday night meal without singing Karibon Olam ve'Olmaya. Not doable. My older brother claims, when he visited Uruguay, that when my grandfather arrived in Uruguay in 1937, he looked out the window, and across the street there was a hotel on that main street in Montevideo. And the hotel was called Hotel Najara. And my grandfather said, oh, if there's a Hotel Najara, we should be singing Karibo. So that's how my older brother views this tradition, that it all started from a random hotel. I don't believe it. I can reject it. I think that it goes back many, many, many centuries. But Rabbi Israel Najara is, again, one of those personalities that's in Tzfat in the 16th century. Go to the next one. How can we talk about Tzfat without talking? How can we relate to Tzfat without talking about Rabbi Shlomo El-Kabetz? There are many El-Kabetzes in Israel. Many, many of them. It's a very significant family. But Lechadodi, written in the 16th century, no Friday night is a Friday night without a Lechadodi. Again, Tzfat. Look at the impact of that city. Okay, now we're going to focus in detail on a rabbi, perhaps not well known, but in the halachic literature, he is the most significant. And his name was Rabbi Yosef Ditrani. Okay? Known in halachic literature as Maharit. So that's what we're going to be calling him, Maharit. Although it says you're born in 1538, it is probably a mistake. It's probably he was born afterwards. We do know for a fact that he died in 1639. We know for a fact that he was the son of Reb Moshe of Trani, who was a great rabbinic authority in the beginning and in the middle of the 16th century. But Maharit is who we are going to be talking about, introducing and discussing. He is our authority of the evening, Rabbi Yosef Ditrani. And to prove his significance, he was born in Tzfat. But he left Tzfat. There was a significant decline that took place towards the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century in the economy of Tzfat. Some related to wool production of England, that as the wool production of England took off, a lot of the importing of wool and weavers that were working on it in Tzfat lost their parnasa. That aside, the decline in Tzfat led Maharit away from that city, dies eventually in Turkey, in Constantinople, and that occurs in 1639, but we have to appreciate the significance of Maharit. We're going to have to talk a little bit of some areas in halacha. Number one, what we have in this slide, just to get the point across of how significant of an authority we're dealing with. In halachic literature, we in general divide authorities into Rishonim and Achronim. In other words, if it's an authority that's prior to the 15th century, he's considered an earlier authority, which carries far more weight than a later authority. Later authorities, as a title, the Achronim, are given in general to those born after 1492. We've had over the past 500 years, some great rabbinic authorities in halachic literature. The list is very, very long. You could all think of people like Rabbi Yosef Karo, Moshe Isserlis. You can think about Magen Avraham. The list is very, very long. But Rabbi Karelitz, the Chazon Ish, this is a 20th century authority. And really you could call him the father of Haredi Judaism in Israel. When he was asked the question, who do you consider over the past 500 years the greatest of halachic authorities? So Chazon Ish says, Gadol ha'achronim, the greatest of all, hu ha'ma'arit, Rabbi Trani. Rabbi Trani, over the past 500 years, he is the greatest authority. It's mentioned that one of his brother-in-law said to him, are you telling me that he's greater than Bet Yosef, than Yosef Karo? And he says, yes, indeed so, Ken Gadol me'Bet Yosef. So it's interesting when you have someone that you don't hear of a lot, and is labeled the greatest of rabbinic authorities in 500 years in the halachic realm. Maharit, remember the name, just to share with you a few areas of where his name and his significance came to play. Let's see the next one. There is a major halachic debate in the land of Israel when it comes to Shemitah. Shemitah is a complex time. It makes it difficult to visit restaurants at times. You have to know what standards they follow. But the major halachic issue that they deal with in Israel has to do with the following question. If, let's say, you have Arabs who own land in Israel, like, for example, in Jenin, right, or in Shechem, or in Hebron, and they produce goods, does the sanctity of Shemitah apply to land owned by non-Jews? Politics aside, if it's a wise thing to go ahead and support those who are not happy with our existence, putting that aside, let's keep it dry and halachic. So, in the 21st century, if I walk into Yerushalayim and I find an old Yerushalmi, and I ask him, does the Shemitah sanctity apply to these carrots that you purchased from an Arab? He would say, no, there is no Shemitah sanctity. No Shemitah sanctity. But as a result of that, you have to tithe. If, on the other hand, I go to Bnei Brak, and I turn to an old Bnei Braker, and I ask him, tell me, carrots that grow by an Arab, do they have the sanctity of Shemitah during Shemitah year? And he's going to say yes. And no need to tithe those. Without getting into the halachic issues, how do they have this fascinating debate? Next. So here we go. The story goes that Mahari tells us a story that his great father in 1532 was sitting in Tzfat with other rabbis. And in 1532 the question arose because what is the status of these items, these many vegetables that are coming in from those grown by Arabs? So he notes that my father in 1532 says, Chayavim bechol dinei perot shvi'it. They are considered 100% items with Shemitah sanctity. So this is Maharit quoting his father. But then he notes he was a bit disturbed. Because, next slide, he mentions, I heard later that Rav Yosef Karo disagreed with my father. He disagreed with my father. And this was a controversy between the Maharit and his father, the Trani family, vis-a-vis the family of, or vis-a-vis the, or confronting the opinion of Rav Yosef Karo. Next one. So this was a big to-do. So it's fascinating that that good old disagreement came into existence again in the 20th century, who the Chazon Ish, who told us earlier that Maharit is the greatest authority in the past 500 years, so therefore Chazon Ish makes it very clear that the carrots grown by Arabs do have Shemitah sanctity. On the other hand, in Yerushalayim, they follow Rabbi Yosef Karo, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of its significance. Now, this has nothing to do with carrots. This has to do with a very sensitive issue. And here I have a clip from USA Today a couple of years ago. Now listen, I'm just quoting. Jews outraged by restrictive abortion laws are invoking the Hebrew Bible in the debate. Okay, July 2019, actually recent. So you know that you're outraged, it says in the newspapers, you got to believe it, right? That you are outraged by restrictive abortion laws. Where does that come from? In other words, true, I'm going to make it very, very clear, we don't see eye to eye with Christians and the right that exists in the United States. But on the other hand, I don't know if we'll consider, if I would label our attitude towards abortion as one that we are outraged by restrictive abortion laws. But when they say Jews in the United States, what are they referring to? They're probably more liberal Jews. But what's relevant to us is the following. In the article itself, so let's do a little bit of research. We are saying that the Jews are outraged. Which halachic authority is brought into the picture? So in the article, they quote a Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, passed away in 2006. So it's time to look at the writings of this great Rabbi Waldenberg. So on the next slide, we're going to actually see Rabbi Waldenberg. So that's Rabbi Waldenberg. He was the author of a work called Tzitz Eliezer. Very popular. He was writing for over 65 years halakha literature. And in it he notes, and indeed he is considered the most lenient among halachic authorities when it comes to the issue of abortion, and this is not our topic tonight. But he writes, Mutar litasek, he gives a green light, lehapil ha'ubar, in a specific situation, kevan derefuat imohi, because obviously we're dealing here with the welfare of the mother. And he writes, V'chol mipnei tzorech imo mutar, kach mevuar, and this is cut off from the slide, but you have to believe me that the source for what Rav Waldenberg is telling us is based on the tshuva of the, fill in the blank, Maharit. Next slide. Hopefully we get this done. Next slide. And the one you see, the one beforehand. Got it? So this is from Maharit. He writes that don't consider it ibud nefashot. We in Jewish law, says Maharit, we don't consider it murder because it's not considered a nefesh. And he proves it without going through the halachic literature. He says, understand very well, we don't consider it a complete soul. Now, there's a lot of debate regarding this Maharit, and that's the next slide, which is a whole different discussion and quite fascinating, because you have Ramosha Feinstein who doesn't agree with this. And he writes that you should know that if you want to quote to me what the Maharit writes in Siman Tzaditet, you should know Tshuva, the Siman Tzaditet, Maharit, who's ziyuf. That's what he writes. What does the word ziyuf mean? It's a counterfeit, it's a fake, meaning Ramosha Feinstein doesn't agree. On the other hand, you're dealing with the great 16th century authority, you can't disagree with him. So what does he claim? That it must not be trustworthy. Fascinating discussion, but what you do have from it is the importance, the significance of Maharit. One more to get you the significance. Now, when you look at halachic literature from the past 600 years, there are hundreds of tshuvot that relate to the question of an aguna. Rabbis put time and effort and energy, the great rabbis, to try to figure out ways to give a green light for a woman whose husband disappeared to remarry. And there is a tremendous amount of literature about agunot. The traditional aguna that we always talk about is one where the husband disappears. But there was another situation that created a problem that was addressed by rabbis. And what we're going to note is that in the city of Tzfat, they had a very specific way of addressing this problem. The problem was, a man comes to the land of Israel, he gets married, he dies without children. The wife needs to be able to remarry, he needs to get release from the husband's brother. What do we call that? Yibum or chalitza in this day and age. What happens if the brother is in Europe and he's not coming to the land of Israel and she can't go back to get her release? What you have in many situations is an aguna. Major problems. So in the city of Tzfat, they addressed this issue in the following way. What they would do is that when a man would want to get married in Tzfat, they would say, ask him the following question: do you have brothers? If he would respond yes, they would say, guess what? We're not marrying you. You can't get married because we're not going to go ahead and create a situation that if God forbid something happens to you, that your wife is stuck. Goodbye. Now, that's how it worked in Tzfat, to protect the women. When, on the other hand, he would say, I don't have brothers, so right before, or as they are signing the T'naim, they would make him take an oath. People were afraid of oaths. Take an oath, you have no brothers, then you could get married. Okay? That is how things worked in Tzfat. Maharit shares with us a story that there was a Jew who originated in Kurdistan. Right in Kurdistan. The Jew from Kurdistan arrives in Tzfat. Tzfat's a growing city in the 16th century. It's a growing city. And for business, the Jew who originated in Kurdistan who came to Tzfat and got married in Tzfat. For business, he made his way to Venezia. Okay? Venice, where east meets west. You go to Venice. Now, his wife is in Tzfat, but there's a tragedy occurring. Vehalach erev Yom Kippur sham litvol. Is it hard to find a mikveh in Venice? No, go to the street. You have a mikveh, right? Especially now, because supposedly their waters are increased. He goes, takes a dip on the main street. Halach erev Yom Kippur sham litvol al sfat hayam. Unfortunately, nitva sham. He drowned. Sad. Ve'elu met ukvaruhu, and they buried him. News gets back to Tzfat that unfortunately this Jew from Kurdistan is no longer alive, and they want to go ahead and release the wife. Unfortunately, as the Beis Din is dealing with this issue, a person walks into Bet Din and shares the following story. That he was at a Shabbat meal by this Jew. He was at a Shabbat meal. And there was another guest there from Kurdistan, not the one who died, a different guest. And they are talking there about the policies of Tzfat, and they mention there in passing that you can never get married in Tzfat unless you take an oath that you have no brothers. The fellow from Kurdistan looks at the Balabais, our fellow who died in Venice, and afterwards he says to him, wait a second, I know very well that you have a brother in Kurdistan. That's fine. Okay? So the idea is that the rule is, this is the rule, Shim yesh lo achim sham be'iro lo yitznu lo. And in this situation, that nishba lahem shelo haya lo ach. So this fellow who went through the procedures, he took an oath that he has no brothers, but suddenly now you have one witness who tells us that he heard him saying the following. Next. That you should know, and the witness says that the Kurdistan Jew was approached. How on earth did you get married? Right, you're going against the rules. What about the oath? So the Jew from Kurdistan explained the following. Number one, I fell in love. Right, so that's it. Love is blind. I had no choice. Niftali bi alaisha. So don't ask me questions. I was in love. Number two, he says you should know, ki acharei seti. In other words, this Jew who originates in Kurdistan, lived in Tzfat, left a wife, died in Venice, years earlier told one witness that you should know, ki acharei seti, after I left my shtetl in Kurdistan, haita magefa gdola, there was a tremendous plague, ba'ir. Ve'amarti ulai met, and I said to myself, there's a good chance my brother died. So I could take an oath, because there's a good chance that he died. So there is a major to-do in the Bet Din in Tzfat, because you have an edut, a testimony of one person who shares with us that he heard this conversation, and based on this conversation, this fellow who died in Venice has a brother in Kurdistan, because the assumption is absurd. So what do? So they turn to the Maharit. Next, what does the Maharit say? He gives us the rule of all rules in Judaism. What is that? Al-Pi, Shnaim, Edim, Yaakov, Davar. You have one witness, that's zero, worthless. So therefore, Benidon Didan regarding our matter, Muteret linaseh lachol meshiter, said no question. He just threw it out with confidence, 100%. One witness, gornished, worth than nothing. That was the Maharitz. Okay, so the greatest of authorities was not just recognized centuries later to be a great authority, he was recognized during his days that indeed he could settle the real difficult issues. Maharit is someone we've been fascinated by. Maharit, I've gone through many, as I was looking through many of the Tshuvot, are fascinating. He deals with a lot of complex issues. People turn to him. He passed away, as mentioned. Where did Mahari die? In 1639, Constantinople. Very good. Time you have there? 27. Okay, in Constantinople. And there's been a desire for decades to try to find his Makom Kfura in Constantinople, the greatest rabbinic authority in 500 years. So, next. In 2008, there's a fellow by the name of Shlomo Epstein. Shlomo Epstein, who's known as a book dealer, a tremendous scholar, he decides that he's going to do all the research possible and spent many years trying to find Maharit, Rab Trani's burial site in Constantinople. Doing research, going through books, going through records. Zero success. Zero success. But then something interesting occurs next. Something interesting occurs. So he searched all the Jewish cemeteries in Istanbul, could not locate the Maharit's grave. Istanbul, you've been there? Anyone? Yeah, you've been there. Not Istanbul? Anyway, not Istanbul. Okay, so now listen to this. Next. Shlomo Epstein, after spending many, many years of research to find the greatest of the Achronim, on a visit to Tzfat, he noticed a fragmented tombstone. And he began the process of deciphering the text. And he was shocked because, next, what does he find? This is a copy of it. This is a picture of a tombstone found about 11 years ago. And therefore, there's a lot of research being done now. There's a whole pamphlet of late tombstones that they were able to locate. And obviously, you can have great difficulty deciphering it from here. So the next slide actually spells it out. And it says, Ma la'am kifku tamid ki nachlu al sheber Yosef. They cried for the loss of Yosef. And a lot of verses, the ones that are intact, talk about Yosef. And it mentions here that it is Yosef ben Marana, Rabbana Moshe Mitrani. It's Yosef, the son of Moshe. And it mentions here, Nach Navshe Bekushtantina. In other words, he died in Constantina. However, what happened is that his remains were brought back to Tzfat. No one knew about it. No one knew about it until this was found. So this brought about a tremendous amount of excitement. You found the Maharit, right? You found the greatest of authorities. And there's no question that we have indeed the location. So the stone you saw, next. Now, the Maharit, this is obviously bird's eye view of the old cemetery in Tzfat. Maharit is here, 5 meters away. You know what you have 5 meters away? The Matzeva of Harabanit Gracia. And the children, there's a manuscript in one of the libraries in New York where the children note that their mother was very close to Maharit, and she basically spoke to him words of Torah. To quote, it's quite fascinating that the children write that you should know that our mother, Kol limudo, all the learning of my father, Shel Adoni Avi. So these are the children of Maharit who are writing. Then all his Torah, and the Torah that you will hear from his disciples, Mimena Yatzuk Vushim. They came from her, meaning she was a very educated woman. A very educated woman. And after the passing of her husband, she decided to make her way to Tzfat. And she was buried there. And because Gracia was so well known, and by the way, the title Rabbanit is not found during the 16th or 17th or 18th century on Matzevot. It was not common. But this was a special woman, this Gracia. And geographically, 5 meters away from Maharit, so therefore there is no question now, or perhaps almost no question. Hamistofefet b'tzel harav, the great Rav. And she was always in his shadows. She was always whispering to him, guiding him. Because when he passed away and was brought to the land of Israel, for 13 years she was very close to him. She stayed in Tzfat next to her deceased husband, meaning he was buried there. She remained close. Matzah bayit, she eventually found a house here. Vayta menuchata, and eventually she rested here. Harabanit, there was no need in those days, right? In 1651, when she passed away in 1652. There was no need to say who would. Everyone knew the Rabbanit Gracia, and the etchings, the fonts, match precisely the etchings of early 17th century. So although for the Hakim family they're not budging, and when you visit Tzfat, find Gracia's caver, and you probably will have descendants of Hakim. I actually was able to find an interview where they interviewed great-grandchildren. They said, we're 100% sure it's Gracia, and it's not far. The archaeologists, historians say, nope, it's a different Rabbanit. It is the wife of the greatest of the Achronim, the wife of the Maharit, who was Mistofefet Betzalav. So this is a little bit of a story that tells us about the significance of the city. I think it's just an interesting story indeed, because sometimes our emotions guide us. And for the Hakim family, emotionally, they're very attached to their Baba Gracia. So for them, it's a fact. But for others, this is indeed the wife of the Maharit. Another good reason to make a visit to Tzfat, to keep our eyes open. And hopefully, we learned and strengthened our personal attachments to these cities that we have the great privilege and the ability to visit in this day and age. And I'll take any questions if you do have about the material. Otherwise, I thank everyone for coming. Is it, what time do you have? You weren't waving. Yes?
How do you explain that you lived to be 101 in those states and then lived to like 55?
Right.
Is that true?
It could be it's a mistake, meaning although we know for a fact that he passed away in 1639, that afterwards I looked up, it's probably a mistake. There's a question mark about his birthday. But we do have a record of people like Rav Haikon that lived to 100. So here and there you do hear stories. But
but then if this is a mistake, the birth also is
the birth, meaning the only question mark is about the birth. The date, there's no question. In other words, there is no question that he died in 1639 and she passed away in 1652. No question about that. That's clear. Yes?
Have you lived that long because Frank's asked about the teeth?
Maybe, so we'll have to go back for another shot. Okay. That was a bitter tea. Okay.
She was with him in Constantinople.
Yeah, but when the remains were brought to the land of Israel, I'm going with him. I'm not leaving him. She felt a connection, and she was mistofefet etzel harav bechayea while he was. She never left. She felt this deep connection to the Rav. And she made her way to Tzfat. She lived there. They didn't have to bring her remains. She was with him in Tzfat already. And some say that this is common. This was a to-do, by the way, in Israel with the research about the Gracia. They even had something on TV about it. It's a very fascinating topic because people are fighting over legacies. But another good reason to feel our connection to the magnificent city of Tzfat. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to our sponsors. And it's nice to have a gathering, an evening together. And we hope at Bezrat Hashem that we're running, what's the next date? The 24th. The 24th. And did it work? Were you able to see the stream? Yeah? Green light? So next time we'll be a little bit even lighter. It will be studying a little bit about contemporary Israel and about the culture there. I think will be interesting as well. Thank you so much. Erev Tov. Continue to enjoy your evening. Thank you, Alan. This is a good trial. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank Rabbi Milevsky, and the dessert table is open. There's cookies and fruit.